things that really strikes me is how much we've matured as a society and changed as a society. And some of the things that were being said by our first three speakers made me feel uncomfortable. You know, about some of our history and things that happened, and maybe people who weren't acknowledged, and all that sort of stuff. And I was thinking about the modern parallels of what we've been talking about, and you know, as to whether what happens now, and as uncomfortable it might have been for any of us. One of the things that really heartened me was when John McCallister said that he would come along. And you know, our historians were talking about Britain's history here and so on. And I was thinking, John is coming from a very different tradition. And maybe I was wondering how uncomfortably maybe he felt, or maybe he didn't at all. But what I really want to do is, I really admire somebody like John that comes along tonight and to share with us from a very different tradition and a different perspective. And we're all in this together for a short period of time on this planet. So, John.
Thank you, and good evening. I suppose a couple of things. I was really just invited along. Joe McHugh said to me, look, come up, we'll have a couple of pints of Guinness and we'll have a good night. And then he eventually texted me when I was driving up and said, look, John, you better say a few words when you hear this Michael Collins thing. So that's how I ended up coming to this. My connection, I will be saying a wee bit about NI21 and where we are in the political sense. My party colleague, Basil McRae, lived in Ramelton for a few years in his early childhood. I was holidaying last year in Rathmullen, and I went past the school, the Brownlow school where Basil attended school, and I sent him a text to say, you'll never believe it, Basil, they've renamed that school after you. And for the next, then I didn't think he would have believed me, I saw him tweeting it. And after that, when I go home now, I'm going to tell him that the statue of him in Letterkenny. And we had a great time in Rathmullen on holidays last year. The one good week of weather in the summer of 2012, we managed to get it in Rathmullen, and we had a wonderful time. I did wonder, going into a few of the bars. I went in for a drink one night and said to the owner, you know, I'm a great friend of Deputy Joe McHugh. I wondered why I kept getting thrown out of places. And then I eventually caught on, and anytime anybody asked me about Joe McHugh, I'd never heard of him. But Joe's been a good friend for a number of years now, both in the British Irish, and I certainly the work that he's involved in, both with the British Irish Parliamentary Assembly and chairing the Good Friday Agreement committee in Dáil Éireann, I think is vital, and certainly he's a fine ambassador for this part of Ireland, and indeed well known across these islands. So it's always a pleasure to be in your company, Joe, and tonight is no exception. So I suppose turning to the main subject, Chairman, what on earth would Michael Collins think about tonight's speaker, as in me? Of course, I'm sure I'm not the only one thinking that question. I, of course, stand in a very different political tradition to that of Collins. Politically, I share much more in common with those who were his opponents in the War of Independence, and those who sat in the other side of the negotiating table from him. That said, Corkman Collins' main bone of contention with me is probably that I'm from the great county of Down. There are, however, some points of contact between my politics as a 21st century pro-union Stormont representative and the politics of Michael Collins. Firstly, as with Collins, this island is my home. My family have lived in the same townland for the past 220 years, so I don't think you could say I'm a settler or a blow-in in recent times. This island, its story, its geography, its rich cultures, is my home just as much as it was Michael Collins's. Secondly, like Collins, I strongly support a treaty that has brought progress to Ireland, in my case, the agreement. Both treaty and agreement were principled compromises to achieve peace and stability. I think even the Minister, when he was speaking just before the break, acknowledged that Collins didn't get everything he wanted in the treaty, as all of us would acknowledge that even the agreement in '98, not everybody got what they wanted. Compromises have to be made. You don't make peace with your friends, as it were. This leads me to what might be a third point of contact, recognising the need for change. In the Doyle debates of the treaty, Collins famously responded to those invoking ancient struggles. And I quote, deputies have spoken about whether dead men would approve of it, but few have spoken about whether the living would approve of it. There are still some promoting myths about ancient struggles, but the living should not be condemned to continually refight old battles. Change, political, social and economic, reinvigorates, brings new opportunities and unleashes potential. Collins saw that a politics which was set its face against change serves neither the present nor the future. So just want to say a few words about NI 21 and new politics for a new Northern Ireland. Thinking of Collins' words, let me briefly turn to my party and its place in Northern Ireland politics. A new politics for a Northern Ireland that has come of age. That's how I described NI 21 at the launch of our party earlier this year. NI 21 is a sign of change in Northern Ireland, of a yearning for a new politics not dependent upon the divisions and mantras of the past. A new politics which refuses to perpetuate the tribalism of the last century. A tribalism which does not describe the diverse and inclusive Northern Ireland of the 21st century. This new Northern Ireland is a creation of the Good Friday Agreement. After great pain of 3 decades of conflict, the agreement gave birth to a new dispensation in Northern Ireland, of devolved government with cross-community inclusion, confidence and consent, of a peaceful society, yes, still challenged by Republican and Loyalist dissidents, but in which the overwhelming majority want the peace to be protected and promoted. Of individuals, families and communities for whom the challenges of building prosperity are now more significant than the agenda of old politics. NI 21 has been created to give voice to the values and the aspirations of this new Northern Ireland. To take forward as we leave behind the 20th century and face the quite different challenges of the 21st century. So the agreement and a shared island. It is not just a new Northern Ireland to which the agreement gave birth. The agreement brought to an end a century of confrontation, of mutual suspicion and recrimination between both parts of this island. In 1998, a new partnership between Belfast and Dublin emerged. The old myths of the 20th century were put to rest. The myth that consent could be dispensed with and that the democratic will of the people of Northern Ireland was of no consequence. And the myth that 2 parts of this island did not have shared interests that required partnership and institutional cooperation. Consent and partnership, cross-border institutions and shared interests became the architecture of the new relationship on this island, which we all share. Any relationship, of course, cannot remain static. It has to develop, it has to be nurtured, and it has to face new challenges. I want to address how we can develop and nurture this new relationship in the 21st century. So, to think about what the Belfast-Dublin relationship should look like in an Ireland, north and south, that has come of age. So what should the Dublin-Belfast relationship look like together as we face the challenges of the 21st century? I'm going to actually look back for some past wisdom. I began this speech by quoting the words from Michael Collins. Let me now use another quote from a quite different figure of the era of Collins. It is a voice that might even unsettle some of you in the audience in different ways. When King George V opened the new Parliament of Northern Ireland in 1921, he said, I quote, "I appeal to all Irishmen to pause, to stretch out the hand of forbearance and conciliation, to forgive and to forget and to join in making for the land which they love a new era of peace, contentment and goodwill." Those are very, very powerful words that the King spoke that day. Throughout the 20th century, in both parts of this island, we failed to live up to these words. We did not build a new era of peace, contentment and goodwill. In fact, we did the opposite. We kept alive past divisions and past grievances. Despite the words of the King, Unionist Ulster walked away from any sense of shared Irishness, and Nationalist Ireland demonstrated little desire to work in partnership with the jurisdiction it condemned as a failed statelet. Nearly a century on, in a changed island, in a context of new relationships, we have the opportunity of heeding afresh the words of George V, of building a new era of peace, contentment and goodwill on this island of Ireland, which we all share. There are three particular ways in which we might do this, particularly over the next decade. So we've now entered a decade of centenaries, with the Ulster Covenant in 1912, the outbreak of the First World War, the Easter Rising of 1916, the first meeting of Dáil in 1919, and the Government of Ireland Act in 1920, and the first meeting of the Northern Ireland Parliament in 1921. As each of these centenaries are commemorated, there will of course be those who are only too eager to trumpet old divisive narratives of our past on this island. And they will do so precisely to sow new discord and new divisions today. They will do so because they seek to undermine the peace and the new relationships we enjoy on our island today. This underlines the importance of how we all approach these centenaries. If, for example, Unionist Northern Ireland decide that they will not become involved in any way in the commemoration of the 1916 Rising, or if Northern Nationalists and Dublin determine that they will not share in the commemoration of the foundation of the State of Northern Ireland, we will only give aid and succour to those who want to stir up divisions of the past, who want to condemn a new generation, north and south, to being forced to live with the divisions of the 20th century. The truth is that each of these events, whose centenaries fall in this decade, have shaped all of us. They've shaped each and every one of us on this island. North and South, Unionists and Nationalists, each of these events is part of a story that we all share. The story of this island and these islands in the 20th century. Of course, we may not choose to celebrate these events, but I do think we have to engage in commemorating each of them. As a British citizen, as someone who believes in Northern Ireland's place in a contemporary United Kingdom, I would not describe myself as celebrating the Easter Rising. I think it is important, however, that I commemorate it alongside nationalists, that I recognise the fact that it shaped the 20th century, Irish history, and in different ways, all our political convictions. Likewise, I would not ask Northern Nationalists or Dublin to celebrate the Government of Ireland or the first meeting of the Stormont Parliament, but I do think we all have to commemorate these events as helping to define 20th century Ireland and who we are today. And we have a model as to how we can commemorate without denying our own political convictions. When Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II paid her respects to those who had fallen in service of the Republic, she exemplified respectful commemoration. Such respectful commemoration should mark how all of us approach a decade of centenaries. Those who want to resurrect the old divisive myths need to be confronted with the strength and vision of the new relationships on this island, of unionism and nationalism, north and south standing together at each commemoration, saying that we are all shaped and defined by these events, that they are part of the story we share as partners and neighbours. Shared values. Of course, it is not just our past that we share on this island. Today's democratic institutions in Northern Ireland and indeed Ireland, and the diversity in our societies, north and south, point to our shared values. It's perhaps a strange thing to say that after a century of division and confrontation, both the unionism and nationalism which have shaped this island have shared core values. Think, for example, of the Ulster's Covenant's commitment to equal citizenship, to civil and religious freedom and material well-being. Now reflect on the proclamation of the Republic. The Republic guarantees religious and civil liberty, equal rights and equal opportunities to all its citizens. Of course, neither Unionist Ulster nor Nationalist Ireland always lived up to these values and principles. In fact, in many occasions fell well short of them. But here we see shared democratic values and the aspiration to build states which would reflect these values. A century on, we are closer to living out these values and this aspiration. We have emerged from 3 decades of conflict on this island with robust democratic institutions, north and south. Our societies are now much more open, diverse and inclusive than would have seemed possible in the mid-20th century. In both parts of this island, amidst all the challenges of present time, we are committed to building open, competitive, prosperous economies. Not only do these shared values find expression in Belfast and Dublin partnership and in North-South institutions, they are also the core partnership between Ireland and the United Kingdom in the European Union. Here our shared beliefs in open economies, meaningful reform, democratic accountability provide the bedrock for the cooperation in Brussels. It is, in other words, not merely pragmatism which should shape the partnership between Belfast and Dublin, rather it's our shared values. This is a message that both the institutions and the administrations in Dublin and in Belfast must be communicating, that the partnership between both parts of this island is rooted in our shared values, that we are not merely neighbours peering over the fence at each other, but rather partners in a shared enterprise of securing democratic, inclusive and prosperous future for all the people on this island. These are the values underpinning the settled constitutional order in both parts of this island. A settled constitutional order endorsed by all of the people on this island. There is a north-south Belfast-Dublin partnership which promotes the interests of all. There are cross-border bodies which give institutional expression to this partnership. This is a 21st century politics on this island. And any attempt to return to the politics of the 1950s by rejecting the settled constitutional order in favour of the pursuit of orange and green myths is a rejection of democratic, inclusive values of 21st century Ireland. It would be, in the words of Collins, an exercise in listening to long dead generations rather than the living. There is great difference between seeking to condemn the present to the prison of the past and listening to the past wisdom in order to build a progressive and inclusive future. So how do we deepen that partnership? Together on this island, we have travelled a long distance from 1916 and 1921, from a Protestant Parliament for a Protestant people, from the mother and child schemes from 1969 and the painful years that followed. And I think it was Niall touched on, worth reminding everyone that during the Troubles, like most periods of conflict, significantly more civilians died than either British soldiers, police officers or paramilitary groups. and so very often the civilians that suffer the most. So where next? How do we deepen the partnership between both parts of this island? How do we ensure that we are ready to meet the new challenges and take up new opportunities? So let me go back to that quote from George V, which I used earlier. I appeal to all Irishmen to join in making a land which they love, a new era of peace, contentment and goodwill. The words of the King clearly speak of a shared island. In fact, of an Irishness common to all on this island. We do share the island of Ireland, Unionists and Nationalists, Irish, Anglo-Irish, Scots-Irish. This island is our home. For some of us, myself included, that home also embraces the island to our east. It is worth probably noting that some of the talk, when you quite clearly feel that sort of the British are to blame for everything, you have to remember that in Northern Ireland, when you say that, a sizable chunk of the population think you mean them. On that basis, George V addressed an overwhelmingly Unionist members of the Stormont Parliament as Irishmen. That's an important point, because we particularly now overlook that. He referred to us all as Irishmen. It is a reminder of something that unionism has too easily and all too readily forgotten. That being a British citizen supporting the Union with the rest of the United Kingdom does not mean that we do not share values, interests and an identity with the rest of this island. It does not mean that being British excludes or denies a sense of Irish identity, or indeed a Northern Irish identity. Reflecting on our place on this island, examining what it means that this is part of our identity, part of our story, and who we are and where we come from. This is one of the challenges facing unionism. If we on this island are to experience a truly pluralist and inclusive 21st century, rather than believing that we are condemned to the unreconciled peace, a cultural Cold War between the monolithic British and Irish identities, there is also a challenge for nationalist Ireland. If unionism has failed to listen afresh to the words of George V and to re-embrace its place on this shared island of Ireland, then the Republic has also to recognise that trust and reconciliation will be built through recognising its particular relationships with the rest of these islands. With the United Kingdom, to be a sovereign, independent republic is not to accept a mythical account of ourselves alone. And this perhaps is the challenge posed to contemporary nationalism by Michael Collins. After the treaty, there were those whose adherence to a mythical account of ourselves alone was greater than their commitment to peace in Ireland, to the common flourishing of this island. Collins stood against that myth. He defended a settlement which allowed both parts of this island, for all its flaws, to grow as democratic states, even as the far right and far left established dictatorships across Europe. And I think Jerry touched on this in his opening remarks, that actually the legacy we have from Collins in both North and South is that democracy survived here, for all its flaws, survived through the Civil War and survived all of the problems that ended up happening in Northern Ireland, while many parts of Europe succumbed to dictatorships from both the right and the left. So now, as we in the 21st century and our hopes to build a progressive, pluralist and inclusive future in this island depend on nationalist Ireland again, recognising that the mythical ourselves alone notion has no relevance in today's world. We are, all of us, interdependent on these islands and in Europe. Now there has, in recent decades, been very significant movement by a succession of administrations in the Republic, recognising shared interests and values between London and Dublin. This culminated in the visit of Her Majesty the Queen, a visit to which the public response was overwhelmingly positive. This should, I think, give confidence and courage to decision makers in Dublin to push forward in deepening that sense of partnership and shared values between the United Kingdom and Ireland. Just as unionism has no need to be embarrassed or feel awkward about expressing the Irish dimension to our identity. So nationalist Ireland need not be embarrassed nor awkward about the relationship and partnership between Kingdom and Republic on these islands, nor about the need to deepen this relationship and this partnership. Related to this, there should be openness to recognising and respecting how allegiances to the Crown was a significant factor for very many Irish people of all traditions, both before and after the Act of Union, and indeed the formation of the Free State. We on these islands are not old enemies. In 21st century Europe, we on these islands are friends and partners. With confidence and courage in Belfast and Dublin and London, we should be forcefully articulating this vision of our interdependent relationships on this island and our islands. So in concluding, ladies and gentlemen, my aim tonight has been to give you an idea of the vision that NI21 has for an island come of age. A strong, mature, positive relationship between both parts of our island, flowing from the past that we all share, working as partners with shared values and a common interest in the context of a positive partnership between the United Kingdom and the Republic. We can speak in such terms as at least partly due to the legacy of Michael Collins in negotiating and defending the treaty. For in doing so, he established the framework for the both parts of Ireland to experience democratic government in the 20th century. The legacy now requires us, in our time, to meet the new challenges, to secure a prosperous, peaceful and inclusive future. We not only have the opportunity to build such a future on this island, we have a responsibility to do so. Prosperous, peaceful, inclusive. Let's have the confidence and the vision to work together to build that future for everyone on Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. I thought a very interesting presentation, particularly his views on the way forward, particularly in Northern Ireland. It's interesting, I mean, just looking at what he and Basil are trying to do. So they're a political party effectively born out of in peacetime. A lot of political parties are born out of violent struggle or whatever, but to be born out of peacetime and be trying to go in a different direction and trying to build stronger bridges between communities is something indeed to be admired, and something that I hope that historians will see as a success in the future. So we wish you and Northern Ireland 21 well in the future. It's amazing what struck me during his speech. He was talking about democracy and all that very important sort of principles. And I had thought of something that Niall had said earlier about the RIC leaving Letterkenny and the guards coming in, and they unarmed and how things were different and so on. And then at the break he showed me a nice photograph which is up here, which he won't let out of his hand, but he's got, I can show it to you, and it's the guards, the first, and people can look at it afterwards, and maybe it may be available, a copy of it in some part in Letterkenny, or in some place.
Or in the newspapers, maybe.
Or in the newspapers, and it is the guards going in to Dublin Castle, the first guards going into Dublin Castle. And you might say, well, look, God, isn't that interesting? But the interesting thing is there's a Donegal person in the middle of the photograph, and his name?
John Connolly.
John Connolly from Drumkeen. You can see him very clearly in the picture. And John, after he retired, lived in the Port Road. So it's amazing, all the connections that you discover through history. And history, it's a living history.